What if, just 4 days into her marriage, a husband, in a room full of guests, put his hand on his wife's private part and said, "Don't go around sharing this, take care of it." This is exactly what happened to Zaiba. She felt like the ground beneath her feet had vanished. Humiliated, she stood frozen, wishing she could disappear into thin air. But the husband didn't stop there. He kicked the cake, flipped the dining table, and stormed out of the hall, shouting at the top of his lungs. Zaiba was left standing there, her face red with shame, as all eyes pierced through her, judgment and curiosity reflecting in their stares. The joyous celebration had turned into an unbearable nightmare. Questions filled the air. How could a relationship that blossomed for 8 long years shatter in just 4 days of marriage? What went so terribly wrong? Zaiba, a highly capable professor known for spreading happiness in the lives of others, stood there powerless, unable to grasp even a fraction of her own happiness. What led to this breakdown? What turned a love story into a tragic tale so soon? Let's dive into Zaiba's story, a journey that uncovers the darkest truths behind a life that seemed perfect from the outside.
From her college days, Zaiba had been independent, standing on her own feet and confident in her abilities. Coming from a well-to-do family, she had developed a strong sense of self-reliance early on. She was known in Merit's academic circles as an accomplished science teacher, instructing students at prestigious coaching classes. Her daily routine was a blend of dedication and hard work, mornings at college and afternoons spent teaching. By 2010, her monthly income had reached an impressive figure of 0.2 billion rupees, a testament to her commitment and talent. Zaiba and her fiancé had been in a relationship for 8 years before their families finally arranged their engagement, a rocket ceremony, which set their marriage in motion. However, while her fiancé was away at sea with the merchant navy, his mother would frequently call Zaiba with veiled criticisms, clearly uncomfortable with her independent lifestyle. "Our daughters wear burqas. They stay at home, manage household chores," she would say. "We don't send them out for education and certainly not for work. Daughters aren't income sources in our family." Each call was laced with hints of disapproval, as if independence was something undesirable, something to be avoided. Zaiba felt uneasy about these conversations, feeling an ever-present tension between their values and her own. Yet, she kept these interactions to herself, never mentioning them to her fiancé, not wanting to burden him while he was on the ship, far from home. She thought, why worry him? He might get stressed or feel mentally disturbed, and I don't want that. Zaiba chose to ignore his mother's remarks, reassuring herself that his love was enough, and that they would overcome any differences. However, over time, she began experiencing strange, recurring dreams, premonitions, as if a part of her mind was warning her of future troubles. Just days before their wedding, she had one of these unsettling dreams. It was vivid, almost prophetic, urging her not to go through with the marriage. In the dream, there was an undercurrent of something wrong, a warning she could not fully understand. Confused and shaken, she called her fiancé to share her anxieties, telling him, "Something doesn't feel right. I have this feeling that something's going to go wrong." Her fiancé, however, remained calm and reassured her with unwavering confidence. "We're about to be bound together for life. Soon, nothing and no one will be able to separate us," he said firmly. His words gave her a sense of security, a faith that quieted her doubts. She let herself believe in his confidence, allowing his voice to anchor her amidst her anxieties. Despite her lingering worries, she chose to set aside her fears, closing her eyes to the warning signs and preparing herself to walk forward on this path, trusting fully in the future she imagined with him. Zaiba's wedding day was grand, filled with all the joy and rituals her family had always dreamed of. She believed she was stepping into a life of happiness, a union built on years of love and understanding. But in retrospect, she would say that her happy married life lasted only 4 days. On the 4th day, as post-wedding rituals were being completed, her cousin, who harbored jealousy and resentment toward Zaiba, decided to shatter this fragile happiness. Her cousin's fiancé had once proposed to Zaiba, a proposal she had respectfully declined, and her cousin never forgot or forgave her for it. With jealousy simmering beneath her composed exterior, she took it upon herself to sow seeds of doubt and mistrust in Zaiba's husband's mind. Pulling him aside, her cousin whispered lies, casting Zaiba in a light of suspicion, painting her as unworthy and deceptive. She suggested that he had made a grave mistake by marrying Zaiba, questioning her character and morality. Her husband, newlywed and vulnerable, allowed these doubts to seep into his mind, and with that, the foundation of their relationship began to crumble. From that point onward, things changed drastically. He grew distant, his warm demeanor turning cold and detached, his words edged with suspicion. Zaiba noticed his change in behavior almost immediately. His once loving tone was now curt, his gaze filled with an unspoken bitterness. She approached him gently, hoping to understand his sudden coldness, but his response stunned her. In a room filled with friends and family, he turned to her and, without restraint, accused her of being involved with other men. His words, sharp and hurtful, cut through her. "You're probably off doing God knows what with other men," he said loudly, and his words echoed in her ears. She was a newlywed bride, standing there, bewildered and humiliated, the weight of his accusations pressing down on her like a heavy burden. "What are you saying? Where is this coming from?" she asked, her voice trembling. But instead of an answer, he looked at her with disgust, saying, "You talk to so many men," as he pressed his hand on her body in a gesture both invasive and accusing. "Take care of this. Who are you even loyal to?" She felt exposed and humiliated, standing there under the cold stare of the man she had trusted above all others. It was as if the man she loved was no longer there, replaced by a stranger who had turned against her. Every instinct told her to reach out to her family, her parents, but she felt paralyzed. She couldn't bring herself to reveal the truth to them, fearing the shame and confusion that would follow. She looked at him, searching for a glimmer of understanding or compassion, but instead his face remained set in anger. "If I've loved you for these past 8 years," she tried to reason with him, "that doesn't mean I would betray you with another man." But her words fell on deaf ears, his doubts deepening, firmly planted in his mind by her cousin's lies. This mistrust was no passing phase. Their fights became repetitive, a continuous cycle of accusations and defensiveness. He brought up her alleged unfaithfulness again and again, each time more heated, each time laced with more venom. In one of these arguments, he finally lost control, raising his hand in anger and striking her. In that instant, Zaiba was paralyzed with shock. She couldn't believe what had happened. Her mind screamed, "How dare he?" This was a moment of unimaginable betrayal. Her own parents, who had raised her with care and respect, had never so much as raised their voices at her, let alone their hands. Yet, here was this man, the man she had loved and trusted with all her heart, striking her as if she were nothing. She couldn't process it, her mind reeling, struggling to understand how she had ended up here. The weight of the moment bore down on her, and she began to question everything. From that day on, life with him became a nightmare. Every day brought new fights, new arguments, each one fiercer and colder than the last. The warmth of their relationship had vanished, replaced by suspicion, anger, and resentment. The home they had once imagined together now echoed only with the sounds of their arguments and the bitterness that had overtaken any semblance of love. Zaiba's marriage, once filled with dreams of companionship, quickly became a nightmare. What should have been a life of partnership turned into a cycle of endless fights and accusations. Every conversation with her husband was shadowed by mistrust. His doubts took root so deeply that, despite all her efforts, she could not convince him of her loyalty. His suspicions grew, overshadowing any sense of love or peace they had once shared. She couldn't understand how the man who had once promised her love was now forbidding her from speaking with anyone. Slowly, he isolated her, first from her male friends, then even from her female friends. Next came restrictions on talking to his cousins and relatives, and finally, he forbade her from contacting her own family. Zaiba was told to remain in the house, confined to a single room, without access to her phone. He made her quit her job, leaving her utterly helpless and dependent. As she spent days and nights in isolation, she could feel the respect she once held for him crumble, moment by painful moment. She could barely sleep, her mind plagued by the weight of his mistrust. On many nights, he would torment her further by making calls to her parents in the middle of the night, at 2 a.m., sometimes 3 or 4 a.m., questioning their parenting, challenging how they had raised her. "Is this what you taught your daughter?" he would sneer, tearing into them with cruel words that shook her to the core. Exhausted and heartbroken, Zaiba would beg him to keep their issues between them. "This is between us," she would plead through tears. "Don't bring my family into it. Deal with me directly. I'm the one here with you." But he was relentless. His hurtful words didn't stop with her. He would drag her family through the mud, blaming them for everything he saw wrong in her. One night, his words went too far. In a cruel and baseless accusation, he suggested that she might not even be her father's daughter, implying some imagined infidelity on her mother's part. "This can't be your daughter. Maybe your wife slept with someone else," he spat out, his voice laced with contempt. In that moment, Zaiba felt her hands tremble with anger. She wanted to retaliate, to hit him, to defend her family's honor against such a vile accusation. She had never imagined that the man she had once trusted completely could speak such poison. The humiliation was unbearable. And yet, trapped in that room, isolated from everyone she loved, Zaiba was powerless. One evening, as is customary for newlyweds, Zaiba and her husband were invited to a dinner hosted by his cousins. The invitation was intended as a warm welcome, a chance for family and friends to see the joy and glow expected of a new bride. But Zaiba's reality was far from what anyone could have imagined. She felt trapped and on edge, knowing she wasn't allowed to speak freely to anyone. Her husband had made it clear. She was to say nothing about the turmoil within their home. Any slip of truth, he feared, would damage his family's pristine reputation. She tried to reassure him to ease his paranoia. "Your family is my family," she said softly, her heart heavy. "We'll face this together. I won't say anything. Just please stay calm." But her words felt hollow even to her. She knew her silence was not a shield, it was a cage. When they arrived at the dinner, the atmosphere was warm and filled with the usual cheer. Friends and family gathered, eager to see them together. Zaiba knew the eyes upon her expected the glow of a joyful bride, the happiness that should be reflected in her face. People smiled at her, their eyes filled with curiosity and unspoken questions. They expected to see the telltale signs of newlywed bliss, the sparkle of a bride's happiness. But Zaiba had none of that radiance. The questions in their eyes were unmistakable. What's wrong with her? Why does she look so withdrawn? Where is her happiness? The person standing before them was a shadow of the once vibrant girl they knew. A girl known for her laughter and liveliness, now dulled and lifeless. People came up to her asking gently, "Are you okay? Is everything alright?" Zaiba's heart ached as she forced a small smile, murmuring only, "I'm not feeling well, just a little unwell." The truth lay trapped within her. And with every inquiry, she felt her strength waning. She glanced at her husband, her mind cycling between two faces. The man she had once loved unconditionally and the family she cherished more than anything. Both were precious to her, yet they felt miles apart, unreachable. She felt isolated between them, torn by a loyalty that could not unite them. The dinner continued, but Zaiba was only physically present. Her mind drifted, her heart burdened with the weight of shame and self-blame. She felt like a ghost, an unwanted burden on both her husband and her family. She could see how her silence and unhappiness were affecting those around her. And in her heart, a painful thought crept in. "I'm nothing but a burden. I'm causing pain to everyone I love." As they prepared to leave, just moments before they were to say their goodbyes, Zaiba excused herself to the bathroom. Her emotions at their breaking point, she felt a wave of despair crash over her. She looked at her reflection, hollow and unfamiliar. Her mind clouded with the pain of everything she had been holding inside. She spotted a bottle of fennel on the bathroom shelf. In a haze of sorrow and desperation, Zaiba took the bottle, opened it and drank half of it, the bitterness searing down her throat. The world blurred around her as she felt her body respond to the poison, her heart sinking further into the darkness that had been building within her. Zaiba barely remembers what happened after that fateful moment in the bathroom. She drifted in and out of consciousness, feeling her surroundings dimming around her. Somehow, she managed to step out of the bathroom, greet everyone, and make her way downstairs with an unsteady gait. Her legs felt weak, barely able to support her, but she held on, following her husband. She knew she was going to fall, feeling a wave of dizziness overcome her. Once she reached the bottom of the stairs, the world went dark as she collapsed, succumbing to waves of nausea. She was rushed to the ICU, where she hovered between life and death for 2 days. She remembers nothing of those 2 days. A blank space in her memory filled only by the sensation of floating in silence. When she finally regained consciousness, she opened her eyes to the sterile walls of the ICU, and a deep emptiness settled within her. She called for the nurse, whispering, "Please, I need to see my husband. Could you send him in?" When he entered the room, Zaiba felt a mix of emotions. Part of her felt relieved to see him. Another part of her was numb, unable to process the layers of hurt she had endured. But as she looked at him, she noticed a fear on his face. It wasn't the fear of losing her or a sign of love or worry for her well-being. It was the fear of exposure. He was afraid that she, a newly married bride, might report him or his family for domestic violence, that she might bring shame upon his reputation and theirs. Zaiba, exhausted and frail, tried to calm him. "Don't worry," she whispered. "Nothing will happen. This was my choice. I did this on my own. I'm not blaming you or anyone." She reassured him repeatedly, even making a formal statement to the hospital that the decision had been hers alone. She sensed his tension ease slightly, but she knew he wasn't there out of love or concern. He was there out of fear. After she was discharged, Zaiba went back to her parents' home, where her father, distressed and broken-hearted, insisted that he wouldn't send her back. He had nearly lost his daughter, and he was unwilling to risk her life again. Her father was resolute, saying, "I won't give my child back to that house. My daughter was driven to suicide. I will not put her in harm's way again." But her husband arrived, pleading with her family, insisting that he would take care of her and change. He held Zaiba's hand in front of everyone and promised, "I will love her, protect her, and make sure she's safe. Nothing like this will ever happen again." He gave assurances to her father, who, against his better judgment, relented. His words sounded sincere, his pleas convincing, and once again, Zaiba felt herself wanting to believe him. She thought to herself, "I've known him for 8 years. He can't really mean any harm, he must love me." And so once again Zaiba returned to that house, clinging to the hope that things would change, that the man she loved would re-emerge from the darkness. But every time she set foot in that home, it was as though something shifted. Whatever promises he made, whatever assurances he gave, were swept away the moment they were alone. The same cycle repeated itself, the fights, the accusations, the isolation. Each time she would ask him, "What's wrong now? Why are we fighting again?" But there were no answers, only more arguments and more silence. In one of these arguments, he began demanding her dowry, the traditional bride's dowry, back. In a final blow to her dignity, he filmed himself taking away the gold set that had been given to her at their wedding. Zaiba watched in disbelief as he carefully documented the removal of each piece, as if she could not be trusted with even this small part of her identity. Bewildered, she asked him, "What are you doing? Why are you taking this?" His response cut deep. "I don't trust you. You might leave, and I can't have you taking this gold with you." The accusation stung, a reminder that in his eyes, she was never fully his wife, only someone he sought to control. With each word, with each act of mistrust, he chipped away at what little remained of her spirit. Zaiba felt her spirit breaking, but she masked her pain with a bitter smile. She looked at her husband and laughed. "You're so absurd," she told him, her voice edged with sarcasm. "After all these years, you still don't know who I am. I've never cared about gold. I always told you I preferred diamonds. I don't need any of this. So keep it. I don't want it." In response, he sneered. "As if you could even afford gold." The words stung, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Fine," she said, "you can keep it. I don't need anything from you." With that, she returned to her parents' home, determined to find some peace. She had begun to believe she would stay there for good, that maybe the quiet of her family's love could finally heal the turmoil inside her. But then one day, an unexpected call shattered any hope of resolution. Her husband wanted to meet, along with 4 members of his family. They were coming to her parents' home, and Zaiba felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. As they arrived, she waited anxiously in her room while her family spoke with them in the hall. But soon, she heard a word that hit her like a thunderclap: divorce. Unable to contain herself, Zaiba rushed out of the room, standing before them, pleading, "But I love him deeply, please don't do this." She looked toward her husband, hoping for some sign of warmth, any hint that he might still care. But he didn't even meet her gaze. He sat there, cold and detached, as if she were invisible. Her voice, her tears, meant nothing to him or his family. An older family member spoke up, looking at her with a mixture of indifference and disdain. "Our son was infatuated with you," he said cruelly, "but that attraction has faded. It's time he finds someone else to be addicted to." His words cut deeply, leaving a wound that seemed to spread through her entire being. She felt a searing pain in her heart, as if he had driven a dagger into it. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was the lesson they were teaching him. This was how little they valued her. Filled with a quiet rage and deep sorrow, Zaiba couldn't stay silent. "How could you say something like that about a person?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Is this what you teach your children, to treat love like a temporary addiction, something to discard?" Everyone was there. Her parents, her brother, her brother-in-law, and they had all heard the hurtful words. The whole room seemed stunned into silence. But the family wasn't finished. They began critiquing her physical appearance, saying, "She's too dark-skinned. Our family members are all fair-skinned. She doesn't match. She doesn't fit with us." Zaiba looked at them, heartbroken. "But I love him," she whispered. "I still love him, even now." Yet, even as she spoke, her husband didn't glance in her direction, didn't acknowledge her presence. He remained indifferent, and with his family, they left without a second look back. That same night, she called him again and again, dialing his number over and over, her hands trembling with desperation. She sent messages, pleading with him to reconsider, to talk, to give their love one more chance. She messaged mutual friends, his cousins, and even family members, hoping someone would help her reach him. But her calls went unanswered, her messages left unread. No one responded. Not a single person reached out to help. In that moment, Zaiba realized how truly alone she was. A few days after that final confrontation, a letter arrived at Zaiba's home. It was a divorce notice from her husband. He had already signed the papers, and they only awaited her signature. Holding those papers in her hands, she felt as though her world was slipping away. The first person she turned to was her older sister. "How is he?" she asked softly, as if bracing herself for an answer she already feared. Her sister, after a pause, replied, "He looks happy." Those words were enough. Zaiba forced a small smile, trying to hide the pain flooding her heart, and said, "Then let him stay happy. Wherever he is, let him be happy." With that, she signed the papers, sealing the end of their life together. In that moment, she accepted that her love had ended where it began, with trust and belief in someone who no longer existed in her life. For the next 24 hours, she was in shock. She didn't cry, nor did she express any outward grief. Her family, sensing her state, gave her space, allowing her to process the enormity of what had happened. She lay in bed staring blankly, her thoughts racing through memories, fragments of conversations, and all the small moments she had once shared with him. The following day, her family came to her room, gently asking her, "What will you do next?" She looked at them, her voice faint. "I don't know," she whispered. "I can't imagine life beyond him. For me, everything has ended." Her family, determined to help her rebuild her life, gently encouraged her to take a step forward. Her father arranged for her to apply for a Bachelor's of Education entrance exam, knowing how much she loved teaching. Despite her fragile state, she prepared, focusing on her studies to distract herself from the ache in her heart. Somehow, she gathered the strength to sit for the entrance exam and, to her surprise, passed with flying colors. This achievement felt like a small victory, a spark of hope in her otherwise dark world. She couldn't believe that she had done it on her own, without him by her side. But soon, that small triumph was overshadowed by an unexpected physical pain. One day, she felt a sharp, unbearable ache in her abdomen. She brushed it off as menstrual cramps or indigestion, thinking it was nothing serious. Holding onto the wall for support, she managed to make her way to the bathroom. But then, something happened that sent a chill through her entire being. A piece of flesh, small but unmistakable, had passed from her body. She knew what it was, but the thought was too painful to accept. Sitting there on the bathroom floor, Zaiba broke down, sobbing in silence. She wasn't ready to confront the reality of what she had just lost. Desperate for confirmation, she made an appointment with a doctor and shared her story. After a few tests, the doctor confirmed her worst fear. She had miscarried. She had lost a child she never even knew she was carrying. Overcome with grief, she sat with the doctor, weeping uncontrollably. The doctor gently asked, "Would you like to call him? Should I help you reach out to him?" Zaiba shook her head firmly. "No," she whispered. "No one needs to know." The thought of informing her husband felt unbearable. She was too exhausted to deal with his questions, his judgments, or his indifference. This loss was hers alone, a secret she chose to keep between herself and the doctor. "Please," she told the doctor, "don't tell anyone. I need time. I need space." Returning home, Zaiba withdrew from everyone around her. She stopped eating, lost all desire to speak to anyone, and sank further into sorrow. Her world felt empty, her life suspended between the past and an uncertain future. Her family watched helplessly, trying to comfort her. But her pain had taken root deep within her, leaving her feeling numb and broken. In time, her depression became evident to all. A doctor formally diagnosed her, confirming what she already felt. She was trapped in a darkness that had no end in sight. Her spirit, once bright and resilient, now seemed all but extinguished, consumed by a grief that she feared she might never escape. Zaiba's journey toward healing wasn't easy. She was put on medication for depression and began taking small steps to reclaim her life. At first, she started with short walks, gradually progressing to jogging, but soon realized she needed more. Physical exercise alone wasn't enough. She needed something that could give her purpose, a sense of direction. Her doctor informed her that her body had been in a state of shock for so long that her organs were struggling to function properly. With a combination of medications and treatment, her body began to heal, and slowly she felt her spirit begin to mend. During this time, Zaiba received an offer for a PhD program at a prestigious university in Austria. Eager for a fresh start, she relocated there and immersed herself in her studies. The timing couldn't have been better, as the world entered the lockdown. The isolation that had once haunted her now became an opportunity to help others. As a counselor, Zaiba devoted herself to supporting people affected by the pandemic, those who had lost their jobs, faced disruptions in their family lives, or battled deteriorating mental health. She saved lives simply by being there for others in their darkest moments, reminding them not to give up. Inside, she knew she was still healing from her own struggles, but her parents' teachings had given her resilience. Growing up, they had always instilled a strong will in her, reminding her to never give up, no matter the setbacks. If you fail, they would say, try again. Keep going and you will succeed. That strength of character had brought her through some of her darkest days, and it now guided her to stand by others who felt alone and abandoned. Zaiba's childhood dreams of independence, once whispered to her family with bright-eyed hope, had become her guiding light. She remembered how she had always wanted to make a mark, to become someone who could stand on her own. It wasn't about success for its own sake. It was about self-respect, purpose, and the strength to be true to herself. Even as she took on a second degree and resumed work, she never relied on her well-off father's finances, insisting on supporting herself. Her hard work and resilience were noticed, and soon one of the top universities in Australia offered her a teaching position, honoring her with an opportunity that symbolized the strength she had built over the years. She poured every ounce of energy into her dreams, working tirelessly, sometimes up to 20 hours a day, fueled by the passion to become fully independent. I want to be strong. I want to be powerful. I want to help others, she told herself. Zaiba knew she had been left alone in her hardest times, and now she wanted to be the help that others could lean on. She was no longer limited by geographical borders. Her vision expanded to include those in need across the world. As she looked back, Zaiba had one message for everyone. Especially for women and girls navigating life's challenges, there's a fire inside each of us. Don't let anyone extinguish it. Protect it, nurture it, let it drive you. Be independent, be strong. Don't rely on anyone else to define your identity. Not a partner, a parent, or anyone. Create your own path, no matter how small it seems, as long as it's yours, and make your mark in the world. And with that, she stepped forward, carrying her story of resilience, a beacon for those who needed a reminder that strength, once found within, is unbreakable.